There you go. Hi, Frank. How you doing?
Good. How are you, David, today?
Good. I'm doing great. So, Frank, I thought, you and I were talking about this a while ago about having uh, a short forum to be able to discuss the concepts in real estate and in financing related to real estate investment for our real estate investment clients. Um, just to kind of go over some main topics and do it in a brief, approachable, easy way. That's kind of conversation. That's kind of what I was expecting of today's conversation. So what do you think about that?
Yes, I think that'd be great. Really help out and newer to the experienced investor. And I think going forward, we can start to cover various questions and topics that hit the everyday real estate investor and business owners.
So the one that I know you get as a CPA all the time deals with forming an LLC or a limited liability company in Michigan as it relates to real estate investors, right? Is that
Yes, get that quite often, and I think it's really a case by case. And I think you get that quite often also. Is there a magic number and taxes and asset protection? But maybe we can cover that topic today. Would be great.
So why don't we can just quickly talk about what an LLC is, a limited liability company. From a legal standpoint, it is a form of asset protection where the law protects the owner of or the creator or the incorporator of the limited liability company under an umbrella of the corporate law and it's called limited liability corporate law. The personal liability of an individual who has an LLC then is not personally liable. The individual is not personally liable for any legal or financial consequences. The LLC or the limited liability company is its own entity, and it bears the brunt and protects against any legal or financial liability of the owner or the member of the company. Did I get that right? Sound right?
Yes. Yep.
All right. So from a financial perspective, why do you encourage people to have an LLC?
So from a financial perspective, an LLC really puts that umbrella, as you mentioned, from a legal standpoint, but then from a tax standpoint, there's a couple various forms of LLCs where what's defined as a single member LLC that, let's say I set up an LLC, so it's from a single member LLC, but my understanding is from a legal standpoint, it still is afforded the same entity protection as a partnership type LLC. That would be an entity that, let's say you and I both are partners in.
Mm-hmm.
From a tax standpoint, that partnership LLC has an additional tax filing, but in my opinion, is more of a formal company because it's evidencing its own books and records as a single member LLC should. But I think the simplicity of a single member LLC is sometimes not fully understood, that the single member LLC flows through to my individual return and skips over a partnership return because it's not required, but I still have all the other responsibilities of maintaining separate books and records, bank accounts, and not commingling the assets. From a tax standpoint, it doesn't impact an owner differently from better or worse. From a financial standpoint, it could be a financial mess, which then as you created that mess, and I think as an attorney, you would say now there's not that corporate protection that they thought they had. And really, it's that good habit, treating it as a separate company of myself, even if it's a single member, really is what I always encourage. And it's more of a legal question, but I think it affords that legal protection.
Right. So if you nailed it on the head, when it comes to acting as a separate entity, you have to do all the things that a corporation would do, and that is your regular accounting, having your books, and complying with, if you have you should have an operating agreement, complying with everything according to Michigan corporate law, instead of applying how the individual thinks they should be conducting their own business, right? So if you treat it like, if you treat the LLC as nothing more than a shell, it's just there to protect, let's say, the name only against, outside creditors or people who wish to sue you, potential lawsuits, any of that. If you don't do the actual work that's required of an LLC owner or member, then you've really just done no service to yourself, because you've basically created what we call a shell corporation. And for liability purposes, we will pierce that, what we call, attorneys will call piercing the corporate veil. We're going to pierce that entity in order to get to the members of the entity and go after them personally for liability, okay? So the other question that people have all the time, and I know you get it as much as I do in your office, is how many companies, how many houses, like for real estate investors, how many houses should I have in each LLC? What do you say? What do you think?
I don't know that there's really a cut and dry answer. I see sometimes one LLC per property, but I see a lot of times then things want to be disregarded because it's owned by a parent holding company and there's really never a set of books. Well, now if the parent is financially collecting all the money, I would assume that that's going to extend the liability and you've just lost that advantage. Really, my intent is on an LLC, you really need separate books and records, and I think that starts to evidence that those are separate companies. If you have 50 properties in one LLC and you're doing everything the right way and have good insurance and good legal protection, I don't have an issue with that. On another note, if you have 50 LLCs for those properties, you have that responsibility to keep separate books and records, or as you said, you'll be able to pierce that corporate veil, and now there's just all this unnecessary paperwork. So larger projects, more on the multifamily side, projects are structured LLC per project, I guess, or per development, where if I have 5 rentals all on the same street and they're functionally all the same, it makes business sense, financial sense to me to operate those as one business and have proper legal and insurance protection in place so that if somebody slips and falls. But the nature of just having 5 LLCs all on the same street, but I operate as one person, I believe you would pierce that corporate veil.
Yeah, if you don't act like the LLC.
Yes.
I know one of the reasons why we get along so well is you and I also are real estate investors. We actually not only talk the talk, but we walk the talk when it comes to providing advice to our clients with regards to real estate investing, right? I mean,
yes.
So from a practical standpoint, I always like to have 2 to 3 properties under an LLC. And then once I have the 3 properties, I'll form a new LLC for the next 3. That's kind of how I like it. But it is a little bit more cumbersome. You do have to do your bookkeeping for each LLC. You have to treat each one with, you have to comply with each one, no different. And you can't treat any one, differently than the next. You have to keep your records, and you have to, for legal purposes, you have to have the right legal documents, the right leases, the right assignments, whatever it is that you're doing. And then you have to make sure that the appropriate names correspond to the home. So if you have, 123 Main Street, but you have a lease and you've named the wrong company, which I've seen happen because people do have quite a few properties. Guess what? You're not afforded that protection. You've made a mistake, and you're going to end up with some problems down the road. So it's really important to keep your bookkeeping clean as well as your legal compliance work clean. So if property A is owned by company A, that's great. But if you make a mistake and put property A under company B, you're not going to have that protection. Actually, you may have no authority with regards to acting on behalf of property A if you've miscategorized that property. I guess, hope that makes sense, but see it quite a bit.
Yeah, and I think you mentioning the leases, that's probably just a simple situation. They pulled up an old lease, they forgot to update all the names and did it themselves. And that's where lease preparation, they're doing it themselves, or having somebody that's just running through everything, and it becomes an issue when it's an issue. And that's where I could probably tell you 10 people that do that and have never had any consequences. Yeah. But it's that one person that did it that had a bad tenant and the lease wasn't correct, and good luck evicting them. And that's a legal question. Now, from an IRS standpoint, you mentioned earlier operating agreements that I hear quite often. My attorney told me it's a single member, I don't need that. Well, from an audit standpoint, that's the first thing that the IRS asks for is, let's see the operating agreement, because that governs how the business is operated from a legal standpoint. But there are certain tax situations that if they're not addressed within that language, and if somebody in layman's terms doesn't understand that, really download a copy and paste off the internet and change the name, now I've got an operating agreement. I've heard that promoted also. If you don't know what those paragraphs mean in that 20 to 60 page document, I feel for you if you're just changing the names, because an LLC for real estate protection should be structured from a legal standpoint differently than a service business, or there's certain language in there that you as an attorney include in there based on their business purpose.
You know how I feel about the internet. Like, I actually love the internet, but at the same, I always call it the gift that keeps on giving. There's people do exactly what you were just saying. They download forms and they're really not clear on what those forms really mean. And just on the aside, I actually had a client probably about a year ago who came into my office and was in big trouble legally. And when they brought out their operating agreement, it was actually documentation from one of the provinces of Canada, not actually from the United States. And they were like, what's the difference? I said, well, that's the whole difference. You don't have any legal protection. You actually did everything under not only just the wrong state, but you went to the wrong country. They downloaded an agreement from, I think it was Ontario, but for them, they might have thought, well, that's close enough. It's close to Detroit, but it doesn't work in a court of law here in Michigan, right? So
yeah, and you actually bring up a good point. I'm starting to see more, I think, as seminars and different internet advice and asset protection. I'm seeing a lot of people questioning Nevada or Wyoming LLCs, and I think there's certain, I guess, in theory, protections, but if you're not doing everything correctly, and my experience has been even the largest, most sophisticated clients are using Michigan LLCs and having that protection because they're calling someone such as you for the proper legal advice. And to maintain a Michigan LLC is cheap. Once you get into these other states, their annual fees are $500 a year sometimes.
Like Delaware.
And yes, and they're actually what's defined as a foreign LLC in Michigan law eyes. For me, for tax purposes, it's not going to change which LLC, but that I think you should speak, that really could have some negative impacts from a legal standpoint.
Right. So let's do this. Like, we talked about LLCs and we talked a little bit about operating agreements, and I think that we should kind of wind it up and then, kind of reconvene next week regarding a new topic, new questions. But so in a nutshell, just real briefly, you can have an LLC without an operating agreement, but you wouldn't advise otherwise, right? You'd always, to me, I always say, if you have an LLC, you formed your corporation, you must have the operating agreement. You would agree with that statement, right?
Absolutely, because that to me, on another note, is evidence that somebody's conducting their business as a business owner versus a hobby, where $50 to file with the state is a great way to run a hobby, but if I'm going to go consult with the professionals, they're going to be structuring their business, and it's really going to tell me they're going to have the better accounting habits, legal habits, operational habits, and many times that's a person that's going to be poised to grow their portfolio to the next level.
I agree. So with that, how do people reach you, Frank, if they have any other questions?
I can be reached on my cell phone at 586-805-1040, or check me on Facebook, Frank, REI Tax CPA. Always find me, and I can always be reached via email at frank@cpanerd.com.
Oh, okay. CPA nerd? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Okay. So I can be reached, I'm David Soble, and I can be reached at 888-789-1715 or at provenresource.com. And thanks, Frank, for taking the time today. This is the David and Frank show, and maybe next week it will be the Frank and David show. Okay?
Thank you, David. Great.
Okay.
Look forward to many more, and be talking to you soon.
Okay.
Everyone have a great day.
Okay, take care. Bye.
Bye.